was a picture-perfect afternoon at Greenfield Park. Families gathered under the shade of ancient oaks, children played on swings, and picnickers sprawled across checkered blankets, enjoying the gentle warmth of the sun. Amid this tranquil scene, Gabe Carter, a man in his mid-40s, sat alone on a bench, engrossed in the well-worn pages of a paperback novel. His calm demeanor radiated a sense of peace, but the bright red Make America Great Again book hat perched atop his head was enough to draw a mix of glances and whispers from passers-by. Katherine Simmons, a spirited woman in her early 50s, stood nearby, her dog tugging slightly at its leash. Her sharp eyes zeroed in on Gabe, the sight of the MAGA hat causing a wave of irritation to ripple through her. To her, the hat wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a statement, a symbol she felt had no place in her idyllic suburban community. "How dare he?" Katherine muttered to herself, her expression darkening. The park, her cherished retreat, had always been a haven for inclusivity and harmony. To her, Gabe's quiet presence in that hat represented a provocation she could not ignore. After watching him for several minutes, she resolved to confront him. With her dog trotting alongside her, Katherine strode over to Gabe. Her footsteps were deliberate, her jaw set with determination. Gabe glanced up briefly as her shadow loomed over him, offering a polite smile before returning to his book. "Excuse me," Katherine said sharply, her tone cutting through the ambient sounds of laughter and birdsong. "What do you think you're doing here with that hat?" Gabe raised his eyebrows, surprised by her tone. "I'm just reading my book," he replied calmly, his voice steady and devoid of hostility. "That hat," Katherine hissed, pointing an accusatory finger, "represents everything this community stands against. It's hateful, it's divisive, and it's making people uncomfortable. I think it's best if you leave." Gabe's gaze shifted from Katherine's face to the growing number of onlookers nearby. Their curiosity had been piqued by her raised voice. "I'm sorry you feel that way, ma'am," he said evenly, closing his book. "But I'm just here to enjoy the weather, like everyone else. I have no intention of leaving." Katherine's cheeks flushed with frustration. She had expected resistance, but not this infuriating calm. "You're provoking people," she snapped. "That hat stands for hate, and I'm not going to let you ruin the peace of this park. If you won't leave, I'll make sure someone makes you." Before Gabe could respond, Katherine pulled out her phone, her trembling fingers quickly dialing 911. "Yes, I'm at Greenfield Park," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "There's a man here making everyone uncomfortable. He's wearing a MAGA hat and acting aggressively." Gabe let out a soft sigh, leaning back on the bench. His calm posture seemed to infuriate Katherine further. Around them, whispers rippled through the crowd, and several people began recording the unfolding scene with their phones. The serene atmosphere of the park had shifted to one of tense anticipation. The sound of approaching sirens broke the uneasy silence. A police cruiser pulled up at the park's entrance, and two officers stepped out, their expressions professional but alert. They made their way toward the growing crowd, parting the sea of onlookers with their presence. Katherine's sense of triumph swelled as she hurried toward the officers. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing emphatically toward Gabe. "That man over there has been causing a disturbance. He's making people feel unsafe with that hat and his behavior." The officers exchanged a glance before approaching Gabe, who remained seated, his book resting in his lap. The first officer, a tall man with a steady gaze, spoke. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance. Can you tell us what's going on?" "It's something." Gabe nodded politely. "Of course, officers," he said, his voice calm. "I've been sitting here reading my book. This lady approached me and told me I needed to leave because of my hat. I haven't said or done anything aggressive." The second officer, a woman with a kind but firm demeanor, studied Gabe for a moment before turning to Katherine. "Ma'am, can you specify what this man did that you found threatening?" Katherine hesitated, her confidence wavering under the officer's scrutiny. "It's the hat," she stammered. "It's a symbol of hate and it's upsetting people. He's provoking us by wearing it here." The female officer's expression remained neutral. "Ma'am, wearing a hat Even one that some might find controversial is not a crime. Unless this man has made threats or acted aggressively, he's within his rights to be here. Katherine's face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder and she could feel their judgment weighing on her. "But he's intimidating people," she insisted weakly, her voice faltering. "Ah," the male officer raised a hand to calm her. "We've spoken to several witnesses, ma'am, and we haven't heard any accounts of threatening behavior. Unless there's more evidence, there's nothing more we can do here." Katherine opened her mouth to protest, but the words died on her lips. The crowd's murmurs had turned to chuckles, and the realization that she had overstepped began to sink in. Her earlier bravado now felt foolish under the weight of the public's scrutiny. The female officer's radio crackled to life, and she stepped aside to listen. Her eyes widened slightly as she received the information, and she glanced toward Gabe with a look of recognition. She whispered something to her partner, who straightened and turned to Gabe with newfound respect. "Chief Carter," the female officer said, her tone suddenly formal, "is there anything further you'd like us to do here?" The crowd fell silent, and Katherine's heart plummeted. "Chief?" She stared at Gabe, her mind racing as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just any man sitting in the park. This was Gabriel Carter, the police chief she had unknowingly called the authorities on. Gabe stood slowly, brushing off his pants. He gave the officers a small nod. "No thank you, officers," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I think everything's under control here." Turning to Katherine, Gabe's expression softened, though his eyes held a quiet firmness. "I hope this serves as a reminder," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent crowd, "that judging someone by their appearance isn't the best way to handle things. We all have a right to be here, to express ourselves, and to be treated with respect." Katherine's face burned with humiliation. The crowd began to murmur again, a mix of laughter and incredulous whispers. She wanted to disappear, to erase the last hour of her life, but there was no escaping the reality of her actions. Gabe gave her one last look, a quiet disappointment in his gaze, before walking away. The crowd parted to let him pass, their respect for him evident in their silence. As the police officers returned to their car, Katherine remained rooted to the spot, the weight of the day's events pressing heavily on her. She had called the police to remove a man she assumed was a threat, only to discover he was the very person entrusted with ensuring the community's safety. The irony was not lost on her, nor was the realization of how deeply she had misjudged him. The videos of the incident, captured by numerous onlookers, began circulating on social media almost immediately. By the time Katherine returned home, her face and actions had become the subject of viral ridicule. Memes, hashtags, and critical commentary flooded her social media feeds, each post a harsh reminder of her mistake. The community's judgment was swift, and Katherine found herself at the center of a storm she had unwittingly created. The aftermath of Katherine's actions was swift and relentless. Within hours of the incident, videos of the confrontation spread across social media like wildfire. Titles such as "Karen calls the cops on police chief" and "MAGA hat incident ends in irony" flooded platforms, accompanied by memes and commentary that dissected her every word and action. By the next morning, Katherine's face was splashed across local news outlets, her moment of judgment becoming a cautionary tale for the world to see. The phone buzzed incessantly, a mix of text from friends, family, and strangers. Some messages were from acquaintances trying to offer support or gently question her actions. Others were brutal, hurling insults and threats. The weight of public scrutiny was unbearable, and for days, Katherine avoided leaving her house, unable to face the world's judgment. But as the days passed, Katherine found herself reflecting on what had happened. Her initial anger at Gabe had dissipated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of shame. She replayed the events in her mind, realizing how her assumptions and biases had led her to escalate a situation that could have been avoided. The calm dignity with which Gabe had handled the situation stood in stark contrast to her own behavior, and that realization gnawed at her. Determined to make amends, Katherine decided to reach out to Gabe. She called the police station, her hands trembling as she explained her request to meet with Chief Carter. The officer on the other end of the line was polite but hesitant, clearly aware of who she was and what had transpired. After a long pause, the officer agreed to pass along her request. 2 days later, Katherine received a call informing her that Chief Carter had agreed to meet with her. The meeting was set for the following afternoon at the police station. Katherine spent the night rehearsing what she would say, determined to convey her regret and take responsibility for her actions. When the day arrived, Katherine walked into the station with a mix of trepidation and resolve. The receptionist directed her to a small meeting room where she sat nervously, waiting for Gabe to arrive. Her heart pounded as the door opened, and Gabe entered, his expression calm and unreadable. Adele rubbed her hands together and unlocked her door, glancing around her room. Her heart pounded as the door opened and unlocked her door, looking around the room. When the day arrived, Katherine walked into the station with a mix of calm and unreadable. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Katherine began, her voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to apologize, not just for what happened at the park, but for the way I judged you without knowing anything about you. I acted out of anger and ignorance, and I was wrong." Gabe listened quietly, his gaze steady but not unkind. When she finished, he nodded, taking a moment before responding. "We all make mistakes, Miss Simmons," he said, his voice measured but gentle. "What matters is whether we learn from them. I appreciate you coming here today. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." Katherine's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to be better. I want to learn from this and make sure I never act that way again." Gabe offered a small, understanding smile. "That's all anyone can ask for. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward." In the weeks that followed, Katherine took steps to educate herself and confront her biases. She attended community workshops, volunteered for local events, and made an effort to engage with people from different backgrounds. The experience had humbled her, but it had also given her an opportunity to grow. For Gabe, the incident became a teachable moment. He spoke at public forums about the importance of empathy and the dangers of making assumptions. Without naming Katherine, he used the incident as an example of how communities could come together to learn and grow from difficult situations. Months later, Katherine returned to Greenfield Park. The memories of that day were still vivid, but she felt a sense of peace as she walked through the park, taking in the laughter of children and the warmth of the sun. She wasn't the same person she had been that day, and for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful about the person she was becoming. Despite Katherine's efforts at redemption, the ripples of her actions extended far beyond her personal growth. The viral nature of the incident continued to haunt her, as strangers from across the country weighed in with their opinions. She was no longer just a name or a face. She had become a symbol of rash judgment, a cautionary tale exploited by all sides of the political spectrum. One morning, Katherine awoke to a knock at her door. She hesitated before answering, her anxiety rising. When she opened the door, a young woman stood there holding a microphone, accompanied by a cameraman. "Ms. Simmons, do you have any comments on your actions that day?" the reporter asked, her tone pointed, but not unkind. Katherine's hands trembled. She wanted to shut the door and retreat into her home, but she knew that running from her mistakes would solve nothing. Instead, she stepped onto her porch. "I'm not proud of what I did," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I let my assumptions and emotions cloud my judgment, and I've spent every day since trying to be a better person." The reporter tilted her head, intrigued. "What steps have you taken to make amends?" Katherine explained her community involvement, her meetings with Gabe, and her efforts to educate herself. As she spoke, she felt a surprising sense of relief. Sharing her journey publicly, though daunting, felt like a necessary step in fully confronting the consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, Gabe continued to receive messages from across the country. Some praised his composure, while others criticized him for not pressing charges against Katherine. The incident had inadvertently placed him in the spotlight, and he used the platform to advocate for compassion and understanding. "We all have moments where we fall short," he said in an interview. "What matters is how we rise from them." As the months turned into a year, the frenzy around the incident began to fade. Katherine's life slowly returned to normal, though she remained deeply changed by the experience. She continued her community work, forging new connections and rebuilding trust with her neighbors. One day, as she volunteered at a local food drive, Katherine saw Gabe across the room. She hesitated before approaching him, unsure if he would welcome her presence, but when their eyes met, Gabe smiled and waved her over. "How are you doing, Miss Simmons?" he asked warmly. "Better," she replied, a genuine smile breaking across her face. "Thanks to people like you." Gabe nodded. "It's not about people like me. It's about people like you who are willing to change." As they worked side by side that day, Katherine felt a sense of closure. She couldn't undo the past, but she could continue to move forward, step by step, toward a better future. Months passed, and Katherine's life began to take on a different shape. Her experiences had left an indelible mark, and she found herself drawn to causes she had previously ignored. She started attending workshops on community building and bias awareness, eager to contribute to the very inclusivity she once claimed to defend. At one such workshop, Katherine found herself paired with a woman named Angela, who had recently moved to the area. Angela's warmth and openness immediately set Katherine at ease, and they struck up a conversation that stretched long after the workshop ended. Katherine shared her story, and Angela, far from judgmental, responded with empathy. "What matters is that you're here now," Angela said. "We've all done things we regret. The question is what we do next." Through Angela, Katherine was introduced to a network of activists and volunteers who welcomed her into their fold. Together, they organized events that celebrated the diverse voices in their community, from cultural festivals to dialogue circles that encouraged open conversations about difficult topics. Katherine found solace in these activities, her confidence slowly returning as she worked to build bridges where once she had seen walls. One evening, after a successful community potluck, Katherine found herself standing at the edge of the park where it all began. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over Greenfield Park. Children laughed as they chased each other, families shared stories, and the hum of conversation filled the air. Katherine took a deep breath, the cool breeze carrying with it a sense of renewal. She noticed Gabe sitting on the same bench as before, his calm demeanor unchanged, though his familiar red hat was absent this time. He glanced up and noticed her, offering a small wave. Katherine hesitated for a moment before walking over to him. She made herself look and shifted out of his beam. Be all right?" She knelt down and whispered. She noticed Gabe sitting on the floor, offering his hands to her, retrieving his tackle. "Can't remember his name." She said, accepting his hand. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, her voice softer than it had been on that fateful day. "Not at all," Gabe replied, sliding his book aside to make room for her. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching the park's life unfold before them. "You know, Katherine began, her tone reflective. "This place feels different now. Or maybe I'm the one who's different." Maybe." Gabe smiled faintly, nodding. "Growth does that. It changes the way you see the world." He turned to him, her expression earnest. "I never properly thanked you. For your patience, your kindness. I've learned so much since that day. Not just about myself, but about what it really means to live in a community. Gabe met her gaze, his expression thoughtful. "It's never too late to learn or to change, Katherine, and it's never too late to make a difference. What matters is that you're trying." The other maids exchanged glances, looking for Gabe to continue. The weight of his words settled over her, and she felt a newfound sense of purpose. She glanced around the park, her mind brimming with ideas for new initiatives and ways to bring people together. This park, once a battleground of judgment and misunderstanding, could become a beacon of unity, a place where people from all walks of life could gather and connect. As the stars began to dot the evening sky, Katherine and Gabe parted ways, with a shared understanding that the journey toward empathy and inclusivity was ongoing. Katherine felt lighter, her heart full of gratitude and hope. The park was no longer just a place of past mistakes. It had become a symbol of her growth and a reminder that every ending could also be a new beginning. Her steps were confident as she walked away, ready to embrace the next chapter of her life with open arms and a renewed commitment to being the change she once sought to see in others. The future was unwritten, but Katherine was determined to make it one of compassion, understanding, and unity. The golden rays of the setting sun bathed Greenfield Park in a warm glow, painting the landscape in shades of amber and orange. Katherine walked away from her conversation with Gabe, her heart full, but her mind racing with thoughts. She had changed so much in the past months, but she knew her journey wasn't over. Growth, as Gabe had said, was an ongoing process, a constant effort to be better, to do better. As she strolled through the park, Katherine's attention was caught by a small group gathered near the fountain. They were holding a discussion, their voices animated but respectful. Curious, she edged closer and realized it was a community dialogue circle, one of the many initiatives she had helped organize. The group was discussing the importance of building bridges across political and cultural divides. Katherine hesitated for a moment, then decided to join them. She listened intently as a young woman shared her experiences of feeling isolated in the community due to her political beliefs. The woman's words struck a chord with Katherine, reminding her of the assumptions she had made about Gabe that day in the park. When it was Katherine's turn to speak, she took a deep breath and shared her own story. She recounted the events of that day, her rash judgment, and the lessons she had learned since. The group listened in silence, their expressions a mix of empathy and understanding. When she finished, a man sitting across from her spoke up. "Thank you for sharing that," he said. "It takes courage to admit when you've been wrong, and it's inspiring to see someone willing to change and grow." Katherine felt a wave of relief wash over her. Sharing her story had been daunting, but it had also been liberating. She realized that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a strength, a way to connect with others on a deeper level. As the evening progressed, Katherine found herself engrossed in the conversation. The group discussed ways to foster understanding and inclusivity in their community, brainstorming ideas for events and initiatives. Katherine suggested organizing a Voices of the Community festival, where people from different backgrounds could share their stories through art, music, and storytelling. The idea was met with enthusiasm, and plans began to take shape. Over the next few weeks, Katherine threw herself into organizing the festival. She reached out to local artists, musicians, and storytellers, inviting them to participate. She collaborated with community leaders to secure funding and support for the event, and she worked tirelessly to ensure that the festival would be a celebration of unity and diversity. On the day of the festival, Greenfield Park was transformed into a vibrant tapestry of colors, sounds, and stories. Booths lined the pathways, showcasing artwork, crafts, and food from various cultures. A stage was set up near the fountain where performers shared their talents with the crowd, and throughout the park, people gathered in small groups listening to storytellers recount their experiences. So, while it's primarily for kids and adults, our reservation was hosted by many adults. Katherine wandered through the festival, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. She saw children laughing as they painted murals, families bonding over shared meals, and strangers connecting through conversations. The park, once a place of tension and misunderstanding, had become a symbol of unity and hope. As she made her way to the stage, Katherine spotted Gabe in the crowd. He was chatting with a group of attendees, his warm smile and easy demeanor putting them at ease. Katherine felt a surge of gratitude for the role he had played in her journey. Without his calm composure and wise words, she might never have found the courage to confront her biases and make amends. When it was time for Katherine to speak, she stepped onto the stage and faced the crowd. The sight of so many people gathered together, united by a shared commitment to understanding and inclusivity, filled her with a sense of purpose. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "This festival is a testament to the strength and resilience of our community. It's a celebration of our differences and the connections that bind us together." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "A few months ago, I stood in this very park and made a terrible mistake. I let my assumptions and emotions cloud my judgment, and I hurt someone in the process. But that experience taught me an invaluable lesson, one that I carry with me every day. It taught me the importance of listening, of seeking to understand rather than judge. It taught me that growth is possible, no matter how far we've strayed from the path." The crowd was silent, their attention fixed on her. Katherine took a deep breath and continued. "Today, as I look around this park, I see a community that is willing to come together, to have difficult conversations, and to embrace our differences. That's what makes us strong. That's what makes us whole." The crowd erupted into applause, and Katherine stepped back from the microphone, her heart full of gratitude. She caught Gabe's eye in the crowd, and he gave her an encouraging nod. In that moment, Katherine felt a sense of closure. She had come full circle, transforming a moment of shame into an opportunity for growth and connection. As the festival wound down, Katherine found herself sitting on a bench near the fountain, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in hues of pink and gold, a fitting end to a day filled with hope and possibility. Gabe approached her, a cup of coffee in each hand. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, offering her one of the cups. "Not at all," Katherine replied, accepting the coffee with a grateful smile. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their drinks and watching the last rays of sunlight fade. Finally, Gabe spoke. "You did good today, Katherine," he said, his tone sincere. "This festival, it's exactly what this community needed." Katherine looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you, Gabe. Your patience, your wisdom, it made all the difference." Gabe shook his head modestly. "You did the hard work. You faced your mistakes head on and turned them into something positive. That's not easy to do." Katherine smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you, Gabe, for everything." As the evening turned to night, Katherine and Gabe continued to talk, their conversation flowing easily. They shared stories, dreams, and ideas for the future, and as they sat together under the stars, Katherine felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey wasn't over, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Armed with the lessons she had learned and the connections she had forged, she felt ready to go on to the further journey ahead. In the months that followed, the ripple effects of the festival continued to spread. The Voices of the Community initiative grew into a series of events, each one bringing people together and fostering understanding. Katherine became a prominent figure in the community, her story inspiring others to confront their biases and embrace change. Gabe, too, found new opportunities to lead and educate. He organized workshops on empathy and communication, using his experiences as a police chief to bridge divides and build trust. Together, he and Katherine became a powerful team, their partnership a testament to the transformative power of understanding and compassion. Years later, Greenfield Park remained a symbol of unity and hope. Katherine often returned to the park, her heart swelling with pride as she watched families, friends, and strangers come together. The memory of that fateful day still lingered, but it no longer brought her shame. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had grown. Still, one evening, as she sat on her favorite bench, Katherine noticed a young woman sitting nearby, her expression troubled. Katherine hesitated for a moment, then approached her. Is everything okay?" she asked gently. The woman looked up, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I'm just struggling with some things," she admitted. "I've made some mistakes and I don't know how to move forward." "Ah, help me, I can do hard things." Katherine sat down beside her, her heart aching with empathy. "I know how that feels," she said softly, "but trust me, it's never too late to learn, to grow, and to make things right." The woman's expression softened, and she nodded. Thank you. That means a lot." As they talked, Katherine realized that her journey had come full circle once again. She had become the person she once needed, someone who could offer understanding, guidance, and hope. And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her story was not just her own, but a part of something much greater. If this story hooked you, there's another one on screen that you'll love. Subscribe to stay updated with all the inspiring, dramatic, and jaw-dropping stories we have in store.